All right, I'm very honored tonight to welcome Paul Spaulding, the author of Prisoner of States. And not only is Paul an author, but he was also a professor of religion at Illinois College. And Paul and his lovely wife, Alma, were once officers of the American Friends of Lafayette. And they are now retired, both as educators and um, officers of the American Friends of Lafayette in New Mexico, a state Lafayette's never been to. So I'm a little disappointed that they moved so far away. They're good friends of mine, but here we go. I'm going to introduce, ladies and gentlemen, Paul Spaulding. Let me get you muted. Let me get you spotlighted here. There you go, Paul.
Okay. Um, Thank you very much, Chuck, and also Bonnie, your wife, who helped set this up. Um, and I really, really want to thank my colleague and wife, Almut, who is right next to me, always giving support. And you will see she appears in this presentation uh, again and again. It's because she has been with me all the way in all the research. And so it, I, um, I have as a first
Do you want?
picture kind of,
Yeah, okay.
Share
this now.
yeah, let's see how it looks. Okay.
Just a second. Slideshow from the beginning. Oh, that didn't work. What's happening? Why is this not working?
I'm not sure what you're all seeing.
I want to get from the beginning, and it's not working.
All right, Almut. In the lower
Yeah.
right-hand corner, there's like a little presentation screen. Do you see that? There's three
Right.
boxes and then a present. Hit that presentation screen. Yep, down, 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 down.
On the
To
right?
the right. Yep, down. Mm-hmm. Further down.
Further down.
No, I see people there.
No, but there's a little presentation screen right under the word followed. 2 more years of exile followed. Do you see that word? Followed?
Yeah, right here.
Oh,
Click
that.
that. Click
Okay.
that.
Didn't see it. Okay, sorry. Okay, here we go.
Okay. Well, this print is a little bit of propaganda because Lafayette, as a prisoner of state, was never shackled and chained. It's because his captors wanted to acknowledge his noble status, so they didn't mistreat him like common prisoners. Still, his incarceration at the hands of the Prussians and Austrian Habsburgs lasted a miserable 5 long years of his life. 2 more years after that were years of exile. The story begins after the conclusion of the American War of Independence, in which Lafayette, of course, had become a transatlantic hero. He returned to his native France, and soon he was in the thick of a new revolution inspired by the American events. He played a key role in establishing a constitutional government for the first time in France, one that proved sadly to be short-lived. Here's a print of Lafayette at the new National Assembly formed in 1789. And then on the right is the tricolor cockade he designed, of course, leading to the French flag that we know. By August 1792, the counter-revolutionary armies of the Prussian king and the Austrian Habsburg emperor had arrived in the Austrian Netherlands, now known as Belgium. They were posed to invade France and reestablish its absolute monarchy. The purple arrows crossing Belgium are the counter-revolutionary forces. Ignore the other patches of color. Well, at this time of extreme crisis for France, Lafayette was commanding general of the French Northern Army, headquartered at Sedan near the Belgian border. Amid the national peril, Radical Jacobins overthrew the new French constitutional government and began murdering suspected opponents. Lafayette was at the head of their list. The picture here is of the Jacobins' invasion of the Tuileries Palace on the 10th of August, 1792, and their slaughter of the Swiss guards. The royal family was arrested and imprisoned. After a brief attempt to marshal a defense, Lafayette gathered trustworthy officers and servants, fled Sedan, and crossed the northern border. His hope was to avoid the Prussian and Austrian forces by passing through a strip of neutral territory of the Prince Archbishopric of Liège. So not all of this was Austrian Habsburg territory. He sought to reach the Netherlands, the Free Netherlands in the north, cross to Britain, and after gathering his family, sail back to his second homeland, the young United States. Drenched by rain as evening approached, Lafayette's party unexpectedly encountered Austrian Habsburg guards at the gates of the town of Rochefort. They requested transit rights, and many emigres at this time did receive transit rights, but someone recognized Lafayette. The commandant then arrested the Frenchman and alerted his superiors. Lafayette's ultimate captors were two monarchs, the King of Prussia on the left and the Austrian Habsburg Emperor, that is, Emperor of the so-called Old German Empire. It was not unified at all. It was about 300 German-speaking states that were all mostly sovereign. More precisely, it was called the Holy Roman Empire of the German nation. His actual power lay in his own crowned lands, centered on Austria and Hungary and Bohemia. While these captors released most of the group, Frederick William II and Francis II had Lafayette and two of his officers who had been in the French Constitutional Convention hauled before a military tribunal in Luxembourg. There they were deemed, quote, prisoners of state, unquote, and condemned to prison for the duration until the French king could be restored and presumably execute them. Sadly, servants accompanied the state prisoners and suffered along with them, all during the 5 years ahead. Thereafter, a forced odyssey began for the captives, one that would take them ever further east to the Prussian military prisons in, and let me first point out, we're going through the Austrian Netherlands. He ends up at the tribunal in Luxembourg and then is taken down to the Rhine and ultimately to the Prussian town of Wesel, and will look ahead to the future. He will be transferred to the Prussian town of Magdeburg, Neisse, on the border with the Austrian Habsburg lands, and then finally taken into what's now the Eastern Czech Republic. It was the territory of Moravia, and Olmütz is the town that these prisoners ended up in for 3 years, after 2 years elsewhere. A first stretch from Luxembourg was by water down the Moselle and Rhine rivers to that Prussian town of Wesel on the lower Rhine. And they were held, of course, in what was called the Citadel. The Citadel itself was only part of massive fortifications because the Prussians were always worried about the French to the west. A portion of the Wesel citadel still exists. The Prussian eagle and crown affixed over the entrance gate. And today the remaining portion of the complex houses a museum for Prussian history in the Rhineland. As victorious French revolutionary troops pushed back the Prussian and Austrian forces and threatened the Rhineland, Lafayette and company were moved further east to another citadel on an island in the Elbe River at Magdeburg. A few years ago, a very creative architect named Hundertwasser erected a fanciful building called the Green Citadel in playful memory of the original Prussian citadel, which had been destroyed. So on the lower right, if you ask in Magdeburg to see the citadel, that's where you'll probably be shown. But that is not where Lafayette was held. Where he was held is now in the middle of a traffic interchange going over, next to the bridge going over the Elbe. All you can see are big lumps in the grass, and that is where, of course, the citadel had once been. I think it was raised as part of the peace treaty at the end of the First World War. A transit prison was yet further east at Fort Prussia in the fortifications of the town of Nysa, now the Polish town of Nysa, on the border with the Habsburg Austrian Empire. On the left is the old Prussian coat of arms, and then on the right, today's Polish version. I show coats of arms for visual interest more than anything. Today at Nysa, or what was once Nysa, the ruined embattlements of Fort Prussia remain, on top of which I was scrambling around in a drizzle while Almut demanded I come down right now. In the courtyard, Polish merchants were unloading trucks and storing supplies in the old bastions where Lafayette and his fellow prisoners were once incarcerated. The Prussians turned the prisoners over at the border to the Austrians, who took them by carriage in a military escort to a large barracks prison in the Moravian town of Olmütz, today the eastern Czech town of Olomouc. Here they would spend over 3 years. The former barracks prison where Lafayette was held is still a military installation today, housing personnel records of the Czech army. To the left of the church from our perspective, in a wing up on the upper left is where Lafayette was held. His windows pointed outwards to that forested area. It was not forested back in his time. On the right, from our perspective of the church, was the military or army hospital.
Yeah.
So I think we can move. There is a plaza of the Republic, the Czech Republic, that is in front of the old barracks prison, and across opposite the old barracks prison was a bookstore that Almut and I stopped by. The owner could speak English. He seemed to be a well-educated fellow. We asked about the location of Lafayette's prison. He shrugged and said he had never heard of it. Well, actually, on the side of that old barracks prison is a plaque honoring Lafayette in both Czech and French.
Can you go back?
Sure.
Here, it's right here.
Yeah, it's right there in the lower right of the building. That's right. this is a floor plan, obviously, from the rear of the prison. The carriage gate that they came through is on the upper right. And they entered the courtyard and then were dispersed to different rooms. Notice the soldiers' latrines on either side of the wing where Lafayette would be held. That's where he was held in two rooms. They were actually rather spacious. They weren't as grim as a lot of propaganda prints of the time, pro-Lafayette prints would indicate. That those were all imaginative. But I mean, it was a real imprisonment. Very thick walls. The windows were barred, and fumes from a sewage canal right below filled his rooms. Soldiers would go through every day trying to fumigate with a branch of that was burning to try to get rid of the stench. Lafayette's former windows are here on the second row, past the drain pipe. And now try to picture a sewage ditch on the ground right next to the walls as it once was. From the windows, the prisoner could look down on a small walled courtyard where soldiers sometimes did maneuvers. Then further down a steep hill lined with fortifications. In the distance there were wheat fields and mountains. The commandant of the Army Archives at the time we visited, Colonel Mojmir Sklenovsky, was kind enough to let Helmut and I have the necessary clearance, and he guided us through the former prison rooms of Lafayette and the courtyard behind. He, in fact, did not know where those rooms were, so he was quite happy to find out. The bottom two photos are from a window of Lafayette's rooms. I could not take any pictures inside the rooms because they were filled with secret military files. Well, the left picture on the bottom is looking straight ahead, if you can imagine looking out the window and downwards. And the right one looks to the right of out the window to the former Army infirmary, which is now today a part of the University of Olmütz. For a time, Lafayette's location was unknown to the outside world. It was mysterious where he had been taken, but his arrest and incarcerations had become a celebrated cause throughout the Western world. A key reason was that just in the previous decades, the political press had been born. This was the first century of newspapers as we now know them. Among the most prominent that followed Lafayette's case throughout his 5 prison years and 2 years of exile, were the leading political newspaper of Europe, a Dutch newspaper called the Gazette de Leiden. It was in French. And then London's Morning Chronicle, which was the leading Whig paper of Britain. The Whigs were kind of like the Democrats, okay? Progressive over against the Tories. And then Philadelphia's Gazette of the United States, which was a semi-official paper of the Washington administration. The Parisian Moniteur Universel, the chief daily in France during the 1790s. Frankreich, a German language liberal monthly magazine of Danish Holstein. Southern Denmark at that time was German speaking. And then Hamburg's Minerva, the most influential paper of the German-speaking world. Minerva was particularly important as it was published in the key center, the central node of Lafayette's communications with the outside world from Olmütz. Hamburg was an independent merchant republic and port on Germany's northern coast, known as the Free Imperial City of Hamburg. And indeed, it was the freest German state. Its publisher, the Minerva's publisher, was a former Prussian officer and a passionate supporter of Lafayette, Johann Wilhelm von Archenholz. This new phenomenon of a political press fueled a network of supporters on both sides of the Atlantic. It waged the world's first major international campaign on behalf of a political prisoner. As AFL member Professor Lloyd Kramer has put it, this lobbying battle served as a template for future such campaigns on behalf of political prisoners. One thinks of Nelson Mandela or Alexei Navalny. Calls for Lafayette's release reached the floors of the US Congress, the British Parliament, and the French legislative assemblies of the time, called the Council of 500 and the Council of Ancients. Angelica Schuyler Church, our first heroine in this presentation anyway, was a particularly key supporter from her country estate west of London. Now, she was an American. She had money and connections. She was Alexander Hamilton's sister-in-law. She was a daughter of a key American general in the War of Independence, Philip Schuyler, from upstate New York. And she was the wife now of a wealthy British member of Parliament, John Barker Church. She sponsored a British, German, Hanoverian physician with a record of daring deeds named Eustace Bollmann, to the right there. Just as a note here, the German state of Hanover was British at this time. The royal family had come from Hanover and they still ruled it. Bollmann was supposed to find out where Lafayette had been incarcerated and then try to rescue him. Bollmann figured out that Lafayette was being held in Olmütz. He used his medical credentials to speak to the easygoing prison surgeon and convince him to sneak in a few innocuous messages about how family and friends were doing. In the margins, though, written in lemon juice, there were questions about the necessary conditions for a breakout. Held over a flame, the writing in lemon juice became visible. In turn, Lafayette responded in lemon juice, and this is an example right here. Thank you, Graham Brent, who discovered these. It was on the margins of English novels that he was communicating. In this case, it was the novel Evelina by the British author Fanny Burney. She was well known in her time. Only recently, these pages emerged from the long-lost papers of Bollmann. And as I say, our AFL Bicentennial Tour president in Philadelphia, Graham Brent, recognized their importance and kindly notified me. After Lafayette described a rescue plan, Bollmann traveled to Vienna, the seat of the Austrian Habsburg Emperor. There you see on the upper left the double-headed eagle and crown of his empire. Bollmann came for equipment, horses, and an assistant. By sheer chance, and this is one of those remarkable, miraculous happenings, Bollmann ran into and recruited a young American medical student, Francis Kinloch Uji. Francis happened to have been one of the first Americans to encounter 19-year-old Marquis de Lafayette when he made his first voyage to America in 1777, landing on the coast of South Carolina right at the plantation of Francis' father, Major Benjamin Uji. Francis was a child at the time and remembered sitting on Lafayette's knee. Father Uji later became a hero of the Revolution when he fell in battle against the British at Charleston only 2 years later. Francis accepted Bowman's offer enthusiastically. He was a patriotic young American. The double-headed eagle on the upper left is over the main entrance of the Hofburg Palace, the main seat of Francis II. And on the above right is Vienna's General Hospital and Medical School. They were the most advanced healthcare facility of the time where Uji studied. Lafayette's plan focused on open carriage rides that he had been allowed twice a week under guard for his health. He was a noble. They wanted to treat him with dignity. It had to come from the emperor himself, of course, this kind of permission. He was taken twice a week into the countryside along the Imperial Highway going north. One day, amid the wheat fields outside of town, and this is standing in some wheat fields looking back at today's Olmütz, Bowman and Uji rode up on horseback and attacked the carriage escort. They fought with one of the guards while the other ran off in terror. Happily, the carriage driver was drunk and he continued ahead without noticing a darn thing. Unhappily, the agent's extra horse broke away and galloped off. The agents then put Lafayette on one of the two remaining horses and told him in English. At the time, that was an exotic language almost unknown in Central Europe. They told him in English, "Get to Hof," a village on the Imperial Highway, where a carriage with a hidden compartment waited. Unhappily, Lafayette understood the command to be "get off." And so he really didn't know where he was going. The agents neglected to give him a map designating the goal, which was an inn where the carriage was waiting. On the lower left is Olmütz. The little X shows where this happened in the wheat fields alongside the Imperial Highway. And Hof is to the upper right, where he was supposed to go. However, unfortunately, he continued north along that broken line and ends up in basically nowhere, a village called Braunschweig. By the way, I'm using the German terms. These are all now with Czech names. So if you try to look up any of those names, you'll find a Czech equivalent today. Uji tried to get away on foot and was almost immediately captured. He was headed into the mountains on the right. Bowman used the last horse to ride after Lafayette, now out of sight. Bowman continued along the Imperial Highway, but found that Lafayette had not arrived at the village of Hof. So all he could really do was to drive the waiting carriage toward the border into Prussian territory. He crossed it and then spent several days looking along the frontier for Lafayette. But soon he too was captured. Eventually, after trial and months of prison, Bowman and Uji were expelled from Austrian Habsburg lands. They were, in the course of the trial, actually looked at as quite admirable in their own way, and they got fairly generous terms. Well, meanwhile, Lafayette had ridden north on the Imperial Highway. This is a Google Maps view of the fateful intersection in Sternberg. The Imperial Highway turned 90 degrees to the right. That's where Lafayette was supposed to ride. And I'm sure they had a plaque with a double-headed eagle or the like right on that building. But he did not see it. He went straight ahead and exited through the gates of the city and continued north. Well, soon his road turned into a lonely trail. he encountered a tanner walking home from work. He claimed, Lafayette claimed to be a Prussian officer, which could be likely. They spoke French. And he promised a good price for a fresh horse. The tanner was rightfully suspicious, but he played along. He promised to go ahead to the village of Brownside to fetch the horse, but he alerted the local mayor and an ambush was arranged. Lafayette was a prisoner again. He spent the night in the upper corner of that house, the mayor's house, vainly trying to bribe the guards around him with undreamed of riches just to let him go. But they refused. A carriage with cavalry guards arrived and took him back to Olmütz early the next day. On the right is a German language plaque which commemorates that event. And I was kind of surprised to see that the Czechs allowed a German language plaque, but they just left it up. It was put up, of course, in 1934, as it says there at the top, before Hitler really began his vicious campaigns, both in Germany and beyond. Once again, the map. Note then Lafayette's route along the broken line going north of Sternberg, and the dot representing Sternberg is where that fateful turn occurred. Another absolutely heroic female figure of the entire era was Lafayette's wife, Adrienne. She was from a very classy family. It was second only to the royal family in prestige before the revolution. She spent months in Jacobin prisons, coming close to death by the guillotine that took the lives of her sister, her mother, her grandmother, and many other relatives. They were dumped in sort of a common ditch that is now where Lafayette and his wife chose to be buried. At the end of the reign, that's, by the way, the Picpus Cemetery in Paris, which most people don't know about at all, most Parisians. We know that because her French friend had no idea, and he finally let us out sort of close to the cemetery. At the end of the Reign of Terror, and with the help of the American ambassador, James Monroe, and his wife, Elizabeth, she was very much engaged, Adrienne finally gained release. She immediately sent her 15-year-old son, George Washington, as he was named, to America for safety. And she took her two likewise teenage daughters, Anastasie and Virginie, with her by ship to Hamburg. There she bought a carriage, hired a bilingual Swiss driver, and drove clear across Germany to Vienna for an interview with the emperor. She took him by surprise to such an extent that although he claimed he could not release her husband, he did allow her and the girls to join Lafayette in his Olmütz prison. Now that's amazing. I have to say the emperor at this time was still a young man, and he probably wanted to be chivalrous, and surely within the next few hours he regretted the decision. But they ended up with Lafayette. And you can only imagine how it must have been to Lafayette, who had been held for a year in solitary confinement because of his escape attempt, how it must have been for him to see his family coming in through the prison door. I mean, he thought he was going crazy. Adrienne said he was just a bunch of bones, So this saved his life. On the left is a quite imagined scene of the Lafayette family. the person who did this had never been in these prison rooms. They actually were somewhat spacious, and the windows you could look through without uh, a ladder or anything like that. And Adrienne obviously brought so much with her in terms of companionship and skills. She repaired his rags, and she drew on her own wealth to pay for better food. And obviously, they had now a form of clandestine communication. She slipped notes to a bribed guard or two who got them into the hands of clandestine couriers to Hamburg. Even if postal authorities found them, they probably dismissed such letters because they were in a woman's handwriting. And of course, women are not politically active, right? So, meanwhile, Lafayette supporters on both sides of the Atlantic were lobbying on behalf of the prisoners. One person stands out in France, my third heroine, Lafayette's friend Germaine de Stael, usually known simply as Madame de Stael. She was a celebrated writer, a wealthy heiress, and a very eloquent speaker. She had helped rescue many people targeted by the radical Jacobins. She persistently addressed authorities in Paris, particularly the 5 members of the French Directory, which was the executive at that time, on behalf of the Olmütz prisoners. The French directors met in the Luxembourg Palace on the right, a very famous park in front of it today. She also wrote several letters making similar petitions to a young French general named Napoleon Bonaparte. Bonaparte was winning victory after victory against the Austrians in northern Italy. His forces eventually crossed the Alps and approached the gates of Vienna itself. Finally, he forced on the Austrian Habsburgs a peace treaty. You can see a little bit of it. The signatures on the bottom right. In final form, this was the Treaty of Campo Formio, signed on the 17th of October, 1797. By order of the Directory, it stipulated that the Olmütz prisoners be released. This was a time when Napoleon was on his rise to power, and obviously these events helped immensely. Early on the 19th of September, 1797, after Lafayette had spent over 5 years of incarceration and the women of his family a full 2 years, they and their co-prisoners departed in a carriage under military escort from Olmütz to ultimately to the border of Bohemia and beyond into Saxony. Once they left Austrian Habsburg territory, they were cheered along the route, particularly places like Leipzig, which had university students turning out in the hundreds to cheer them. Eventually, they make their way to the area of Hamburg, sometimes called Hamburg-Altona because a suburb was in Denmark, but was really part of the metropolitan area. Hamburg was an independent merchant republic with the freest and largest press in Germany. Today, it's still the press center of all Germany. It was on an international frontier with Denmark, which was on 3 sides of the city. And then across the Elbe to the south was British Hanover. Here, the long reach of the emperor ended at last. A boat took the party into and across the harbor. Ship crews fired a welcome, waved flags, and cheered. The Lafayette family and co-prisoners stepped onto free land at the harbor gatehouse. And you can actually see the stairway going up that they took.
Yeah, here.
The imperial ambassador officially turned them over to the American consul, John Parrish. Thereafter began a time of exile, 2 years of it. Initially, the Lafayettes moved to Plön in Danish Holstein. It's a beautiful area surrounded by lakes. The Danish official living in the large white palace was part of a circle of pro-Lafayette supporters. He was, well, I better not go into detail, but the family of the Lafayettes continued to an estate nearby on a lake. They basically took a boat across a lake to this estate owned by none other than Adrien Lafayette's aunt, the Countess Adrienne de Tessé, a very practical lady. She ran the farm very, very well and apparently sold it one day at a great profit. Almond and I, that farm no longer exists, by the way. It was on a peninsula, and another completely different house now is sitting there. But Almond and I tracked down records of how other nobles of the area engaged with the Lafayette family. These records were kept in the former wine cellar of an old manor house of the estate Nampton on Plön Lake. Below those stairs going into the main entrance, there's another entrance that leads to the wine cellar. And this was filled with piles and piles of old manuscripts. You know, if you're rich, you don't have to throw away anything. Your house is so big, you just leave it. So it was a wonderful archive. We had to have, of course, the permission of the present estate's baroness. The Lafayettes made friendly visits right here, as well as to other estates in the area. Eventually, the family moved to a rental home of their newly married daughter, Virginie, in the Netherlands. Lassetrie, I guess, was her married name. This was a short distance south of the big city of Utrecht. The house was named Buitenlust, which is Dutch for outdoor pleasure. And it was just outside the walls of this quiet town. If you look to the right, you will see it. Today, the town really doesn't look that much different, and it is still a quiet, lovely place. Next to canals that Lafayette was able to take to Utrecht by skiff. Well, this is this is
Utrecht is entering here.
okay. Thank you, Alma. That's the canal that he had to take, and he had lots of friends in Utrecht, by the way. And when French soldiers began garrisoning the area, they were delighted to meet him. Napoleon was rising to ultimate power in France and did not want a political rival like Lafayette in the country. When Napoleon carried out a coup against the Directory that had run the country for the last 4 years, this was called the coup of the 18th of Brumaire. When he carried out that coup and ascended himself to power in the place of the Directory, Lafayette used a fake passport to slip across the border in late November 1799 and returned to Paris. Napoleon was furious, but Lafayette assured him that he wished only to retire to the countryside and not be politically active. And Napoleon was really caught because he wanted to be known as the rescuer of Lafayette. He just didn't want Lafayette to show up. It had been a long 7 years of prison and exile. Gilbert Lafayette and Adrienne Lafayette moved into the Chateau Lagrange that she had inherited. another way that she saved her husband. This was a few hours carriage drive southeast of Paris in the quiet fields of Brie. The chateau had been plundered and gutted in the revolution, and the couple spent years fixing it up. And they had very straitened finances. There, Lafayette adopted a new profession, gentleman farmer, somewhat after the model of George Washington at Mount Vernon. But he really loved farming, he found. However, one day he would return to the public stage again. So there we go. That ends the presentation. Does
Thank you very much, Paul.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm going to open it up for questions. That was fascinating and a subject that we don't talk about a lot, but certainly a very important part of what made Lafayette a great man.
Yeah.
So anybody have any questions for Paul? Maybe you want to raise your hand or unmute yourself, but I don't see anything in the chat right now. So I'm opening it up for people that might want to ask a question or two.
Chuck, this is Linda.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, it's who?
Linda was the mayor of North Jersey.
Hi, Linda. How are you?
Okay, good. Why was Adrienne not guillotined when her sister was, and what was the key?
Basically, the American ambassador told the Jacobin authorities, if you kill her, you will have lost the last ally you have. So that intimidated them enough to spare her.
Okay. Thank you very much, Helmut and Linda. Thank you. Some more questions, please? Comments?
Chuck is a
Go
professional.
ahead,
Paul.
Graham.
Yeah. So fascinating, Paul. Thanks so much.
Good to see you, Graham.
Indeed so. Thank you. Paul mentioned the discovery of these documents right here in Philadelphia, the Athenaeum, and I've had the privilege of looking at those, and we're still working through them and to see what the impact may be on the story. So far, it just seems to corroborate certain things, but the discovery of the pages of the book, Evelina, that Paul mentioned, is pretty exciting, particularly when you see them and you touch them and you realize the conditions under which they were written. But I had a question regarding those. It turns out that the pages that we have, I think there are 6 of those pages that Bowman kept, and they were passed through the Bowman family. And then I think it was the daughter of Bowman, Elizabeth Bowman, married a Keating.
Yes. Yes.
And the Keatings are a Philadelphia family, still actually quite well known here. And they were bequeathed to the Athenaeum of Philadelphia at some unknown date, which is kind of curious because they weren't accessioned until recently. But what's interesting about the pages, Paul, as I think you know, is that on one side, the messages are legible on both sides of the pages. But on one side, they're in French. On the other side, they're in English. So it's 2 separate messages. And the messages are different. So it would seem that the book was used more than once. And I was curious what you thought about that, because it would seem that once the secret message was visible, it would remain visible. And so that would mean that when the second secret message was passed through the doctor that was conveying this book to Lafayette, wouldn't it have been dangerous to have had that message visible? It would seem to kind of undermine the whole secrecy of the process.
That's a really good point, Graham. I don't have a ready answer to that. It's something to consider thinking about. I wonder if the French message wasn't relatively innocuous, because English, again, was completely unknown in this part of Central Europe. It was like Finnish or something, you know. And I would assume that the plans for the breakout would be on the English side, but I'd have to look at it I haven't had time to give that more consideration, but that's a really, really good point.
Thank you, Graham. Thank you. Um, David Badich, did you have a question? I thought you got to unmute, David. I can't hear you. You have to unmute.
The books where the pages slice out.
While you're looking for the unmute button, I'm going to ask you
Yeah,
a
I
couple
got it.
questions.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead, David.
Just curious when Lafayette found out of the death of George Washington, the president.
Well, let's see. Do you know the exact date of the death of Washington in 1799?
It was December.
December. What
December
was it? What was
12th,
it?
I think.
December.
December 12th.
So
Yeah.
it was right after, almost days after his arrival in Paris. Remember that it took weeks for a message to get from North America to Europe by sailing ship
Sure.
in those days. Very hard for us to wrap our minds around in this day when we have email and all kinds of things to immediately communicate with. But it must have been a body blow just a few weeks after he had returned to Paris. I would say my guess would be maybe late January or February of 1800.
Okay, one last question. Where was his son, George Washington Lafayette, at that time?
Okay, he had returned and met up with his family in Denmark.
In Denmark.
Yeah, he had, as you may know, he had stayed in the United States part of the time with George Washington. George Washington at first wanted to keep him at arm's length because he wanted to remain, the head of a neutral country. He didn't want to take sides. But
Yeah.
when he finally allowed this young man to come, it looked just like Lafayette when he was 19 years old, coming to America, and they developed just like there had been between Washington and Lafayette Sr., a kind of father-son relationship. And George Washington was very sorry to see him go. He tried to delay his departure, but
Okay.
he was back with the family in exile.
Okay.
Thank you,
Thank you.
David.
Chuck,
Here's an interesting
Chuck,
question that I get a lot.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
No,
Someone
I
talking?
want to, it's Alan, but go ahead. I want to ask a question, but you go first.
Okay. Here's a question in the chat. And it's interesting. I get this one a lot, actually. While Lafayette was preparing his escape, did he not leave his family in the lurch? In a lurch.
well, his family wasn't with him yet
Yeah.
when he made that escape attempt. So they were, far away.
No, but I think the question is,
I think.
he left France without his family.
Yeah.
How did Adrienne feel about that? Did she feel betrayed that he left him? Am I asking that question correctly, Dale?
I hear you. First of all, if Lafayette had tried to return to his family, he would have been arrested immediately and executed.
Mhm.
So what his plan was to make his way to Britain and then try to arrange to get his family out. I believe that was what he had in mind.
Thank you. All right, President Hoffman, you had a question?
I did. Paul,
Yes,
I've
Alan,
always, good to see you. I've always been fascinated by characters like Bowman. Dr. Bowman probably didn't practice too much medicine. He was too busy being an adventurer.
yes.
But he winds up with Aaron Burr during his
Yes.
expedition, and he gets arrested and tried
Yes.
in Virginia and gets acquitted. But what happened to him after that? I take it he settled in America?
Well, actually, many things happened. He was imagine this, he was the only American to attend the Congress of Vienna in 1814 to 15. And people were very impressed by his knowledge of economics and trade. He told about the conditions in North America, and he was even invited into the office of the minister of, I guess, treasury or something of the Austrian Empire to get the minister wanted advice. He also helped to introduce the technology of steamships to Central Europe. A really odd thing. He knew about it because this was an American invention. He he tried his best. When he was very desperate, he turned to medicine, but he did not believe in medicine. At that time, you really have to know the history of medicine. It was all a bunch of quacks. I mean, really, there was no difference between a trained university physician and a quack who was walking around selling snake oil. It was they it was starting. I have to say, I'm being a little unfair because it was starting to become scientific. Things like um, uh, immunization against smallpox, that was one real key development. So, but Bowman basically did not really think it was that helpful. Nevertheless, he had to get through times of poverty in which he would turn to practicing medicine in order to survive. He also he also started what you would call chemical engineering. He tried to develop uh, all kinds of new uh, kinds of, well, I don't know, new ways of using platinum, for instance. Ultimately, he was hired by the Baring Brothers of London, a big trading firm that was destroyed about, what, 15 years ago by someone who, a young fellow who started uh, doing exaggerating trading that ruined the whole firm. But Baring Brothers was a very traditional trading firm, and actually he was an agent of them when he went to the Congress of Vienna. So they were seeking out uh, business. Later, eventually, he goes on a trip to South America. This guy is multilingual. He can speak English, German, French, and Spanish. That's why Aaron Burr wanted him, because Aaron Burr was going to create this Western Empire, and Bowman was basically going to be his Secretary of State. But he went down to South America. He met Bolivar, and he went into negotiations with the Colombian government to mine platinum on behalf of the Baring Brothers. He signed a contract, and then on his way back at Jamaica, he got yellow fever and died. He was thrown into some unknown grave. That's how he ended up.
I'm going to get two more questions in. We're an hour in.
Could I
Yeah.
ask a question, Diane?
Okay, but I got some questions in the chat too, so hang in there, everybody. I do want to get to those questions in the chat. One of them's very good. Diane, go ahead.
Well, speaking of medicine and all of that, I just this past week reread a pamphlet about Adrienne's last illness that was actually written by an AFL member, and I had forgotten about this. Of course, being in the prison with Lafayette, she was. The conditions were so terrible that she became very, very ill. And that illness reoccurred little bit after she was freed and back in Paris. And that's ultimately, well, she died in 1807, but apparently it was probably from lead poisoning, and I hadn't realized that. But this article, talks about the treatments that she was given, and I had not remembered that, and I just thought that was interesting in the light of medicine and the story of Olmutz and the effect it had on those folks. So anyway, Adrian, yeah. Do you know about that, Paul? What was?
Well, I think that's a very interesting insight. I actually, showed my father-in-law, who was a physician, the data that I had on her symptoms. And he said, you really cannot diagnose based on those. So I was kind of at a bit of a dead end, but I think that is an interesting possibility. However, she actually became sick in the Jacobin prisons of Paris. So she was already ill from that treatment. I can only speculate.
Right.
So,
yeah. Very interesting. We
Good
can talk
question,
some more
Diane.
about it.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul. All right, so two more questions from the chat. And this one, I think, is on a lot of people's minds when we talk about this subject. And that is, why didn't the United States do more to get Lafayette released, given all he did for himself, did for the Americans during the American Revolution? Why didn't the Americans get more involved in his releasement?
Yeah. Well, George Washington had an overall policy of neutrality at the time. He was very concerned. Remember, we were a little banana republic. We were so weak in comparison to these great European powers of France and Britain and so forth. So he was very concerned that we survive as a nation. However, American diplomats immediately began to try everything they could to help Lafayette. They funneled money to him, and they read the chapter in my book about what they were up to, and they were doing it in a kind of legally unclear situation, because Lafayette, once he returned and joined the French military again, I think he lost technically American citizenship. He had American citizenship, and it was a question of whether he really still had it. Congress, I think about 20 years ago, cleared that up by making him an honorary citizen of the United States. Why would they do that if he hadn't in some way lost it? So diplomats were very concerned, and they did what they could behind the scenes, American diplomats.
Thank you, Paul. And the only last thing I want to ask you, Paul, is in the chat, there's a lot of banter about whether or not Adrian met with Napoleon or not. Did that happen at any point?
Yes. She actually went on ahead of Lafayette, returning to Paris, and she began banging on the doors of Napoleon and arguing with him over the importance of her husband returning. She prepared the way for him, definitely. I mean, this woman was so important in his life. I think he basically fell in love with her a second time. He recognized how important she was in his life. He had messed around with a mistress or two earlier in his life, but boy, from this time on, he was absolutely committed to Adrienne. And after her death, he would go up to her bedroom and spend a couple of hours in meditating every day in memory of her. So, it's just like my wife. Without her, I'm toast.
And just like me as well. Thank you so much. Let's give Paul a round of applause, everybody. Thank you very much, Paul. That was fabulous.